perspective, children talk about how their parents take care of them.
Yeah.
At least in Canada, they use that words. They don't talk about parenting. They don't want to talk about, but they talk about their parents taking care of them. And so the whole center of Caring Dads is about that, the way in which you put value on your children and that relationship, and where you center that and think about that. And then how doing that can shift some of the ways you think about other things in your life. And so that's where, as a center, caring and the way that you care for children is important. The way children are cared for is important. Um, and I also think, and I say that, and maybe that word has also, I know that social care has shifted the meaning of that word sometimes.
Mhm.
So care means many things to many people, but I think fundamentally it's about how is my dad taking care of me, and then that's how we got Caring Dads.
That makes total sense to me. And in fact, kind of mirrors a lot of the conversations, and we're reminded of some of the stuff that was being talked about last night. I do like the caring for dads thing, because that none of us are naive. We've all been working with human beings for quite some time, and it's not always going to work. But I feel it's much more likely to work if we do care, in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. I think people put heart and soul into it. It's kind of too important not to. And if you just sat out there in a kind of a robotic way, just delivering the program, that wouldn't work. It just simply wouldn't work. So be the change that you want to see, and so on, and all those kind of cliches. But there's another element of it too, of course, that care is not naive. Care also involves sometimes very difficult and challenging conversations. And I care about what the men say, but I'm also listening very closely over 16 or 17 weeks to what they say. And I'm noting discrepancies and things that don't quite fit, or things I want to know more about. So care isn't kind of a simple kind of here's a cup of tea, even though we do use cups of tea. Do you know what I mean? It's an important thing. But yeah, you have to care about what you're doing in order to do it well, I feel. So
Can I
Katrina, I would
chip
like,
in? Can I
oh,
chip in
please
something there,
do,
Dylan?
Linda, please
I was
do.
just going to say as well that I think you often start off focusing, don't you, on how the dads are with their children, and that's where those really great child-centered, the more sort of positive, strengths-based stuff at the
Hmm.
beginning. But I'm thinking of a dad in the last group I did who did incredibly well and is now actually sole caring for his children when he wasn't even allowed contact, unsupervised contact to start with. But at the final review, he said something about, he'd found out his ex-partner was taking drugs again, and he'd done this thing of telling everybody about it, and particularly her family. And in the meeting with the probation officer, he was saying, I did this because it's really not okay for the kids. There'd been a long history of quite difficult and dangerous things the kids were being exposed to, not just by him, by more recently by her. And because I'd got such a good relationship with him, and because he was so almost evangelical about the child-centered thing, that he was, I think, unwittingly almost using it. And so you have to be able to challenge somebody and say, you know, being child-centered, that he could argue that it was child-centered to do what he did, but what I was saying was, is that really in the children's interest to make extra grief for the mum and make it harder for her to get help and make it harder for her to seek help with, getting back on track with her addiction? And he totally got it in the end, but we had this really difficult conversation. I think he expected me to say, great, well done, you've been child-centered. And I was saying, no, I don't really see it like that. I
I
get why
to
you're saying that. Do you know what
I,
I
I
mean? And so I
I
think it's good
totally
to
understand
you
that. I
move
think
on to
Katrina
that.
would like to respond.
Yeah, and I love that you gave that example, because it is such an important example. And I bet I know this is a room of people who've struggled with it, and it still needs to struggle constantly. That, if we look at the research on child outcomes, one of the there are two most important things of what we do,
Yeah.
I think, in Caring Dads. One of them is that pattern of reacting with anger to anger, the hostility, the sort of child has an emotion and it gets met with anger or with some sort of rejection of that emotion. We know, like research shows over and over again, that's kind of breeds anxiety, and also it breeds uh, oppositional kind of behaviors in kids. That's a super important, well documented thing we need to work on. The other super important, well documented thing that we need to work on is the way that dad respects and treats the kids' moms. And it's part of, and trying to make that part of fathering and being child centered. Like, I don't know, do you call it child and mother centered? Or family centered isn't quite right. That brings different things. But to the fact is that when dads are behaving in ways that are undermining or hostile to, or that are not supportive of kids' moms, it absolutely impacts children. And it impacts children more than the opposite. So, in studies that have looked at that and looked at the impact of, like, for lack of a better word, the co parenting or the parenting alliance, the lines for moms are really much more mom to child. And that probably has to do with the way that we have still a system where mothers take more parent responsibility most of the time. They're most often the primary caregiver. So the mother child line tends to be more predictive than the co parent to child when we're talking about moms. But for dads, that's not true. For dads, if anything, that relationship with the kid's mom, and it's more important when they're separated, when they are together. It's more important when there's more challenges, when there's not. But that relationship is absolutely central to how children are doing. And so, and Linda, that's such a great example of the ways that when we forget that, when men forget that, when systems forget that, and systems try to forget that all the time, right? They really want to look at the parent-child, in this case, the father-child relationship, and forget that it's really important how the father is relating to the kid's mom. That's super important. And so they want to look at it in a kind of black and white way, and you can't. You have to make how you treat your kid's mom, it has to be part of what it means to be child-centered. Yeah.
Uh, Linda's example was also, I mean, we do get a smattering of guys, it doesn't happen very often, who end up a sole carer for the
Yeah.
child. And I got a couple at the moment, and I can think of I mean, they stand out to me sufficiently that I remember them very well. And it seems to be usually the case that mum has usually very significant mental health and or alcohol and substance misuse problems. That's generally how it works. And in fact, I had a guy, I'm sure some of you do this, but I like to get a graduate from the last group that I feel has done well and get him to come in and talk to the new group pretty early on in the second or third session if I can. And this one particular man came in, and he is the sole carer of his child. I know him for a long time because back in the day when I was a probation officer, I remember him. And he's doing a pretty good job with his child. Hasn't been any involvement in services for about 3 or 4 years. And at the end of the group, um, our conversation with him was about not only how he was going to look after his child who had um, global development delay and pretty significant needs. Do you know what I mean? But how was he going to support the child's relationship with the child's mother? Because that still remains. That's not. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to kind of disappear or go away. And it was the single most thing that he struggled with. Um, but he'd actually managed to do that. She could only see the child in a contact center, and he continued to support it. So I think that's not an entirely unusual pattern, but I kind of when I was starting doing the group, I wasn't expecting to see men who were going to be the sole carers of the child, and it seems to be because I haven't a huge amount of examples, but that seems to be not untypical kind of pattern that we see. I can see Will has got his hand up there.
Yeah, so I just need to give a massive shout out to one of our dads what's recently completed the course. Exactly same situation as yours, Dermot. He's now sole custody of three of his lovely children, to be fair. He was one of the ones where when he found out it was 17 weeks, he was like, "You're kidding me, aren't you? I can't last 17 weeks." Halfway through, we started to ask Diane and myself, can we extend it? Can we have more sessions? And was like, no, it's 17 weeks for a reason. He's definitely the one when we do our next cohort in the next couple of weeks, we are definitely going to invite that dad back in the second, third, or fourth session to give an overview for the new dads coming on the course because he has done absolutely brilliantly, and he was all over caring dads. And honestly, he has not stopped talking about caring dads. Full stop. So
Of
all
course,
credit to that
of
dad.
course, I'm too long in the tooth not to be skeptical about every damn thing I hear. But we learned a couple of lessons, myself and Elaine, from a man who did that for us for a number of years. And again, a man who started off extremely high risk. He had a plan to kill his partner basically by when we got involved with him. And he did very well in the program. And he was also, he had done a perpetrator program also. I can't remember before or after, Elaine. Did he do it before or after he come to us?
Perpetrator first.
Yeah. And he routinely came back and he would talk to training groups and judges and all sorts of things. And we did ask him, Elaine really made he was Elaine was his point of contact and vice versa. And she kept track of him and occasionally kind of had conversations, etc. But he used to get in a terrible state when he used to come along and do these things because it, as he said, it would bring it up all over again. But he made himself do it because in actual fact, for him, it was partly a way of maintaining his change. And that even though he would say like for 2 weeks before one of them sessions and for 2 weeks afterwards, it would be really going around in his head. But he continued to do it.
Can I just say a couple of things about what we've already talked about, the word caring?
Okay.
I quite often talk about that word in the three-way interview with the dads. And I say to them, because, you know, like they're there because their parenting is being held up to scrutiny, obviously, for all the reasons that they've been referred. But I will quite often say to them, the reason the program's called Caring Dads is because this program only works if you care, because I think that's true. And
Yeah.
that's why we call it that. So it's not that we don't think you care, it's just that sometimes even when we care, we can get things messed up and we can, you know, there are still things we can learn to do, but there's this little thing called the continuum and it won't work if you don't care. You know, we'll show you which is at one end and which is at the other, but your caring is what takes you to use the positive end, you know. So it's, I can use that word caring. And one of our dads who, we've done this little film, Katrina, if you log on to our website, St Michael's Fellowship, it's a group of our dads who finished the programme. And one of them actually says, yeah, when we started, we were talking about, you know, caring dads, caring, that word caring, you know, and then he says this lovely thing. He says, but I always thought I could parent before the programme. He said, like, I can walk. I've been walking all my life. He said, but after I did the programme, it helped me to like, no, you put your heel here and your toe there and you walk differently. You thought you were walking all your life, but now you're walking differently. And it's just a lovely, but they focused on that word caring. They do see it as a bit of a Care Bear thing if you don't. So it is worth addressing. And then the other thing about dads who've got sole custody, I've met a few of those across the groups we've been doing. And I would say that to a man, they all really wanted their kids to have contact with their mum. They did. I think there is that, you know, I think there is an implicit, there is a societal thing where the dads themselves do have an understanding about that communication between a mother and a child and the importance of that. And they were all looking towards hoping and wanting for mum to be well enough and things to be well enough. It was usually mental health and drug addiction, where they really did all want their kids to have some sort of positive communication with mom. So that has been my experience of the dads that I've known who have had
Thanks for
sole
that,
custody.
Elaine. And it reminds me too that mainly the women I've met and worked with over the years also want positive, meaningful contact with the dads, even though some of the kind of, I don't know, noises off that you hear kind of suggests that isn't the case. So I would like to say one little thing, and then Will has a point to make, and then I would like to give the floor to Katrina, since we're fortunate enough to have her here today, and just like Katrina to use the time in whatever way you will, and then we'll come to Elaine, talk about reports, and if we've any time left, we'll have a little bit of a, how would I say, bit of Q&A. Just the one little thing is, there's a principle of the program that the program should benefit the child even if the man does not change. I also like the principles rather than rules about the program because they're better for guiding practice. And I've been acutely aware recently, and with my last little recruitment round, about what am I saying about the dads who don't turn up, who are kind of maybe do turn up and just tell me to do one, or you know, all the various ways that they have of kind of saying, I'm not getting involved with you, I'm not having anything to do with you. And the more and more I deliver it, the more and more I kind of feel it is really quite important to be feeding that back into the system in a clear way and to just ask people, this is generally what I find myself doing, what do you think the consequences of this might be for the child? If this man doesn't feel he has a problem, etc. And I think that's slightly different from the kind of minimization, denial, and blame kind of cliche almost. You know what I mean? It's actually kind of perhaps not getting stuck with that because we know they minimize. We know they say it wasn't as serious. We know they blame her. We know all of those kind of things. But I think it's a little bit more about asking the system to take responsibility for what you can see in front of you right now. And it's just the way I think about it. So, Will, you had your hand up and put it down again, so you may not wish to contribute, but did you want to say something there?
Oh yeah, it's just to come in on what Elaine was saying. So this dad, what I gave a massive shout out at first, he was slightly reluctant. Well, no, not slightly. He was reluctant for the children to see the mum because of various things and whatnot. But for the fact of caring dad and the parenting continuum in particular, that kind of opened his eyes, as well as Diane doing a bit of restorative work, challenging aspects as well. That really did benefit him. And after a while, he identified the reason for him stopping the children seeing his mum, their mum, was because of his own issues and not what the children wanted. So that really did open up his eyes, to be fair.
Thank you, Will. So I have in the chat put in the link to the St. Michael's page with the videos on. Please go and have a little look. But now I'd like Katrina to take the floor. And Katrina, you know, please use the time in whatever way you see fit. What are you thinking and what would you like to say today?
I want to say every time that I get together with people, I get new things. And Elaine, I'm just going to say I really love that it won't work if you don't care. I think that's so lovely. Thank you. I also want to reflect on, you know, one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have conversations like this is because caring dads, at least to me, and I think to many of us who are involved, has always been a little bit more than a program and a little bit, you know, it's about holding a particular kind of space. And that space is a space that brings a lens of understanding of domestic and family violence into a system. And it's not easily, it's not an easy formula. So to both say, yes, this father has made a lot of progress in his sole caregiving and, you know, is really seeing his children more. And yes, by doing what you're doing and taking this position that now, because he's been doing so well, we're going to kick mom out and really write her off. And that's not good practice. And that's not actually, and I need to then lead with the father in order to do that, to be in that space of pushing back to the system in both ways. it's like pushing back to the system to say, yes, you need to see and engage fathers, but yes, you need to expect a kind of action that is child-centered, which means that it's not just, I guess I'm not articulating this well, but in that case, you're kind of, you're in this space that isn't a father space and it isn't a mother space. It is really trying to hold that child space and what is best for the child in this case. And it's not best for the child to kind of fall into dad is doing great and therefore we're going to write mothers off. And we've intervened in I can think of multiple cases where that's kind of where the system is going, because the system still wants a quick and easy answer. And that's the way we are. We like quick and easy answers. But, it is better for children to figure out how he can support their kids' relationship with mom, even if it is only supervised. How do kids understand? How do you help kids understand that that doesn't mean that they're not good enough to have a relationship with, right? It's much more damaging when a parent just totally disappears. And many men will have had that experience in their childhood that you can pull in, right? About what is it like and how would it be for your children? But anyways, I'm in reflecting on this, I'm reflecting on the fact that that's the space we're trying to hold. And there's a lot of pressure, I think, to put us into, or put this work into a dad space. And right now that's happening a lot in Canada. In Australia, there's a lot of focus on engaging men and doing work with men and boys. And I'm glad about that. But the space is still not a space about men. It's a space about kids. Yeah, Dermot.
I mean, I've just been thinking about that a lot, and I'm sure we all do, but it's something about the child's voice. So routinely in groups, we are asking the men, what does the child think about that? What does the child feel about it? Why does the child react like that? And so on and so forth. But I found there's a bit of a problem systemically, which is that in that little project that I talked about, it's a huge project that Breach Featherstone and other people were involved in. We know that there is an impact where the men's voices are not heard, and really we just want them to get out of the picture. Do you know what I mean? We know that that's kind of stupid, because even if they appear to be out of the picture, they're not really, and they're still having an impact, and they're still in the child's head. So we know that that's not working. But also what they're finding in their research study is that the child's voice is not being heard. That the child's kind of is muted after the initial crisis, when the child talks to the police officer or the social worker or the dinner lady or the DSL, that really the child's voice kind of starts to get lost in the picture. And then what we have mainly is mum under the spotlight. And we know that there's a problem with this. It's just your basic sexism, because we're just defaulting back to a social idea that says women do caring. Right. And we know we need to raise the expectations for men. Men can do caring too. So why don't you get with it a little bit more? And we've talked a bit about that. But when the system operates like that, you don't get a dynamic of the child's voice over time. And I kind of think that, when I get to a certain stage in the group, I'm kind of going, this is really what I need you to be doing now. We're thinking about. I need to get really concrete in your kind of things that you need to change. And I need the child's voice for that. And I find that as the case, as it were, progresses, that voice becomes progressively more muted in my experience. And I'm kind of struggling with that a little bit. Maybe it's just this particular group, but I think that's not an unusual pattern, as it were. I can see that Linda has her hand up there.
Thanks, Tim. I was just going to add something that's a little bit similar or sort of related, which is I think because we do that thing of, as people were saying earlier, listening to men and their experience, which they've not had. If those men have had either very neglectful, abusive or traumatic childhoods themselves, what seems quite crucial to me, and obviously it depends on how much trauma they're carrying and whether they've had any help for it often, is that you get to a certain point of the program and you realize with your co-facilitator, this guy's engaging really well, he's talking really well, he's doing all this stuff, but actually, are we hearing anything about his children? Do we know the children any better? And whenever you're talking about how he was parented or experiencing stuff himself, he's all over it. It's really expressive, really, and that's good. It's not to say that's not a good thing, but that doesn't in itself translate to anything for the children. And often I think there's this kind of linchpin at some point, usually in the third section, where you almost have to say, we understand all of this and it's really significant, and that's stuff you might need to do some work on, but it's imperative that you can then turn and be the parent, because this guy's stuck in being the child. So in a sort of TA mode, this guy is in child mode himself and can't get out of it, and it's not capable sometimes of taking on an adult role with his own children. So it's absolutely hopeless. And the ones who kind of at the end you think they're not going to be getting contact, and their own trauma is too much, it's often that they can't get out of that child mode themselves. And obviously that's not our job in a sense. It's not a therapeutic group in that sense, but there's always that is a part of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think about those cases. I think about those cases where there are these really difficult conversations around, what is actually best for your child in this context. That doesn't mean necessarily for the whole of your life, because you're going to be that child's father for the whole of that child's life. Yeah, some of those are some of the cases that stick with me the longest. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. And I see that Edward Millian clinical environment putting into practical thinking. Yeah, well, and I think that shift, I think that when this is like a Caring Dads experience over many years, is that there's often pressure to make programs shorter, and there's also often pressure, like when Caring Dads programs go wrong, it's because that shift hasn't happened, where you get that space for fathers, which is great, but you have to then turn to what is going to change for the child, and how is that going to look, and what behaviors are going to be different, and how the child's going to experience that differently. And the system also, I would say, once dads are engaging better, they feel more comfortable. But that's where we come back in and say, okay, yeah, I'm glad you feel more comfortable, but and what's changing? And holding that space to make sure that change happens is important. Yeah.
I've just finished a report on a guy who had a very traumatic childhood and was extremely abusive to a child's mother, was really abused by his own father, and I've just had a conversation with Mum in which she told me he was also encouraged to abuse his younger brother by his father. And I've ended up having conversations with him. He's very intelligent, he's very articulate. I think he got the judge on side. And a lot of what Mum said wasn't believed. And obviously I've got to work with the fact finding of what's been, I can't. But what I found really useful with him was reminding, I'm just thinking more and more these days about like the head and the gut, like this deep stuff that they know and feel and act on, and what they can articulate and intellectually understand and articulate. And I do find that when you're trying to have those conversations, I have in this particular case recommended that it has therapy, which I don't normally do, but I think he's still so dangerous. He can articulate all the right things. And I had to have that conversation with him about saying why I'm saying this. And a way of making it understandable for him, this like what you turn to when you're under pressure, and the difference between what you know and what you've learned from this program and what you can articulate, and what you can do when everything's fine and you're in the contact centre being observed. Is that surgeon quiz. That quiz, you all know the surgeon quiz. It just works wonders for helping them to see the difference between an assumption and a place you go to from your tummy and what you know in your tummy and your intellect.
They won't all know the surgeon quiz. I know what you mean, because it's not the first time I've heard it, but perhaps you could just roll it out there.
Just very quickly do it. So the surgeon quiz is dad and child in a car crash. You know, you stretch it out a bit. Dad and child in a car crash. Dad is able to move. They're both injured. Dad runs into the hospital carrying the child, flops down in A&E. Child is rushed into surgery because the child is seriously injured. Surgeon comes rushing in and says, I can't operate on this child. It's my son. So then they're all like, oh, you know, so then they're all looking for a male figure. Like, you know, who is this? And then while they're still thinking about, what, has he got two dads? Is it a stepdad? Is it a priest? Is it a bum? You say to them, okay, let me change it slightly. The nurse runs in and says, I can't assist in this operation. It's my son. And they go, oh, it's his mum. So like, okay, so why didn't you think the surgeon was his mum? If I'd have asked you a straightforward question at the beginning, are all surgeons male? You'd have said, no, there are women surgeons. But when you're confronted with that particular scenario, you immediately assume, and that's how an assumption works. And an assumption and a deep bit of learning, it influences what you think. It influences everything you do and how you act, even though intellectually you know this. And so we have to have that conversation. And it really helped me with this man, with explaining to this man why I've got to say to a judge that I think he needs therapy, because I'm trying to help him to understand there's a difference between what he knows in up here and what he draws on when he's acting. And it is really, yeah, I found that report really difficult because he's tried really hard, but I think he's super dangerous still. So, and putting the child in the centre, I have to say that. You know, I have to say, I didn't actually say I think he's super dangerous, but I said I think he's still experiencing the impact of trauma. He still thinks his dad is great, even though he was totally abusive. This puts him in an emotional dilemma. He's got to, you know, and all of that stuff. I framed it in. But yeah, that's what the judge will know. That's what I'm saying. And I said, I think he needs therapy. So yeah, they're hard to write, those reports, when you've worked with a man for 17 weeks who's trying hard. Anyway.
And you're the most important person to write them to. And you're going to go back, we're going to talk a little bit, you're going to talk a little bit more about reports. So let me do a little blurb before then, because Dermot asked me to do a couple things, and so I will. And then I think that conversation is just so important. Is that okay? So I just want to say, Caring Dads has been through some challenging things over the last year, and so I haven't been around very much, but I've still been doing stuff. And so we're going to be starting kind of a new chapter of Caring Dads, although it won't necessarily look much different, but we're kind of looking at different ways and things come January. But I will tell you a couple of things that I think you should know about program adaptations and work, and also a couple things around evaluation that you may or may not want to take advantage of. So in terms of program adaptations, you know, I still think a little, so there is on the website, and it should be downloadable from the website, an adaptation we did for the Arabic diaspora. And there are some, you know, it basically follows the Caring Dads program, but there's some interesting exercises in there and things that you can pick up on and thinking about, particularly a child's identity and a parent's identity when the family has immigrated to a new country, and how you navigate that, and what some of those conversations might be. There's also a little bit that draws on a little bit more introspection as opposed to CBT around kind of reflecting on change, because of we worked with an agency here in Canada that specializes in work. It's called the Muslim Family Resource Center, and they work. That's what they do. And also we had an imam involved with the adaptation work as well. And so some of the sort of flavor and shade of those exercises come from not my understanding of, you know, the differences in how to think about how to change, because I was really raised in a very Western framework, very action-oriented, kind of let's be very clear, but that's not necessarily the same frameworks of thinking and change that exist around the world. And so you see some of that in that program. We've also been working, and will be released probably early in next year. I've been working with the military family, so child and family centers associated with the military, the Canadian military, and we've worked on a program called Military Dads that will be that a group of us have worked on that. It's a preventative program. It is one where, they started with Caring Dads, and then it's been hard. It's been a hard negotiation to try to bring in the abuse parts, because one of the things is like, let's just dump all of that because we don't want to talk about that. But you need to talk about that even if you're doing prevention. So it's been a kind of struggle back and forth about how to get there. So it's definitely a military specific program, but there are some, when it comes out, there's some really, I think, some good thinking about, the CBT work going in through through the feelings, through the emotions, as opposed to the thoughts. And so I often, when we're talking about this, or if we've got facilitators that are have had a little bit more experience, sometimes I'll do an advanced session around, okay, you may have a guy and you may want to go through the E instead of the T, because the whole CBT is it goes around and around and around, and you need to interrupt that. And thoughts are a very good way to interrupt it, but you can also interrupt it with sort of emotion focused kind of work. So how do you do that? And there's also an analogy that we worked with, which I think is useful to think about, is when you're talking about working kids and moms, we kind of did an analogy of a bridge, and like, here's where you are and here's where the kid's mom is, and how do you actually make a bridge between that, because you can't just pull the land together even though you might want to. And then what are those things? You can't actually force the bridge from just one side, you have to build from both. How do you actually put a guardrail across? Like, what are the parts? And a group discussion about how do you actually build that relationship, but using that kind of analogy. And if your foundation isn't very good, and if you keep crumbling, and if you keep, like, that's not going to work. You can't build a bridge unless you have some solid foundation and you're there, because if she throws a line and you're not there, then you're not going to be able to catch it. So like, it's an analogy, and when that comes out, it's probably worth a read, just to kind of think about the ways that you can present some of that material. In Australia, we've been working, the University of Melbourne, Kathy Humphreys and a group, Kids First there, has been working with Odyssey House to try to think about whether or not we can do an adaptation that's specific to working with dads that are dealing with substance use, and sort of a collaborative program. My take on that is we're not even close. So there's been it's been really challenging. Part of the challenge has been a very narrow understanding of domestic violence within substance use services, and actually a lack of focus on children and fathers and children within substance use services, period. But then there's been a lot of kind of systems level challenges, where in a substance use, we've got this many sessions, we have to go in this way, and does that actually fit with a kind of collaborative model to do work with a family? And then kind of managing as you were talking about, people just dropping off. Really, there's been a relapse and then they're gone. It's such an important space, because of course those children are so impacted. But I'll just say that we have been trying to work in that space, and I don't think we've got it right yet. Yeah. So those are just 3 bits and pieces. And then Elaine, I don't know, Elaine was doing some work with younger dads, which I think, and that, yeah, really challenging as well. Yeah, really challenging to get the younger dads. So, it's been interesting. There's one other bit that probably, we also have been doing work with, we finished a program with an Indigenous community here in Canada. So they're going to be launching a version of the program that again it's more caring dads than it is not caring dads. But it brings in a lot of sort of, it brings in the aspects of collective trauma and colonization and its impact And it's a lot of sensibilities from the specific Indigenous community in which it was I try not to use the word adapted. It's like, because we didn't kind of go with that way. We went with, here's what we do. Let's just figure out what might make sense. It turns out it looks more like adaptation, but that wasn't the start point of it. So the other thing is, for anybody who is interested in providing some data, I can talk about how we can do that and what it looks like. So we have had at various times in Caring Dads a sort of a pre-post set of questions that men can fill out. We've done bits of research on that. I kind of call that, or I think of that as program evaluation as opposed to research. So things that can be built into the program that can or can't be shared, that you can use and that we can use as well to understand what is and what isn't changing. In Canada, we've used it because, it is actually it's been surprisingly sensitive because, sometimes agencies will say, yeah, we're going to do this. They'll send our data. I'll take a look at that data and we'll take a look at that data relative to others. And then I'll go, well, wait a second, this actually looks a little weird. And I'll loop back around. And it turns out that the agency has decided to do, and it's something very bizarre. They're inviting men in every 4 sessions. So it's kind of an open group, but not kind of an open group, or, they've just stopped doing partner contact, or like there's things that seem to show up. But in terms of what that looks like, let me just see if I can show you well, I can share my screen. I think I can share my screen and show that. So let me just do that for a second. I am going to share this. Okay, so the way that it's set up right now, and this may or may not work for people, this is the post-program survey. It's set up, we set it up as a Google Forms that, and there's a manual that goes with it. So you can actually, there's a manual about how that looks, what are the different parts of it, how do you introduce it, whether or not and how you share the information. You can also do it on paper, but having it online means that you can get a QR code and then dads can just do it on their phone, and then you own the data and then you decide whether or not to share with us. The idea is you do it at the beginning or first, or even at the intake session and then at the end. And then there's a survey that you can do as facilitators that takes, how many men started, how many dropped out at different points, what are some of your reflections on that particular group. I go back to the form. It captures a little bit about the living situation. And then this is a little bit around, these are items from a fathering involvement questionnaire. It's about really those actions that are more child-centered, being with your kid and doing being child-led in talking or actions or knowing a little bit more about your child. These items are a brief screen of anxiety and depression, which we added because of some research around the importance of dad's level of distress. There's also there's also the brief irritability questionnaire that's included in here. Other people have been getting on my nerves. Things have been bothering me more than normal. I've been feeling irritable. So these are the brief irritability questionnaire, and that captures into that irritability hostility that we know has had an impact on kids. And then we now have 2, so these are behavioral items about how often the kids are exposed to or part of conflict between fathers and mothers. And then these items are ones that there are too many of. We're still trying to reduce them, but we've gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on trying to understand and trying to measure this aspect of father's relationship with kid's mom and how he's treating children's mother. And we've gone back and forth on it because we know it's important. You can see it in mother's reports, you can see it in observation, you can see it in research, but so many of the questionnaires that we've used in the past and that are out there have a victim blaming or a mother blaming aspect to it. So a parenting alliance question, for example, might be, my partner supports my decisions around parenting. Well, actually, that's not what we really want to ask dads. We don't want to ask if their partner is supporting them. We want to ask if they're supporting their partner. So we have actually been working on this for years. This latest set of items was a result of a series of focus groups we did with men to try to capture that aspect of responsibility and blaming and working together. And so they're items that are about the relationship with about kids' moms and also men's own thinking about how they're dealing with situations. So, for example, I think about how I can do a better job supporting my children's mother, or I worry that my children may blame themselves when there's problems between me and their mother. And so, trying to get at some of the things that we teach, it's important for my children to have a strong relationship with their mom, or my children's mother makes it impossible for me to communicate about, I think it says, problems. So as I said, there are too many of those items. There's 3 pages of those items because we still haven't managed to reduce them. And then the final thing that's in here is, and it's built into those 3 pages actually, is a questionnaire on, it's on mentalizing, I think is what it's originally about, but it's really capturing child-centered fathering. This is an example of one of those items. I rush through activities with my child without really being attentive to him or her. I have difficulty accepting my child's growing independence. Those are items drawn from an empirically supported and kind of internally consistent parental responsiveness kind of scale that gets at that aspect of, to what extent am I taking the time and thinking about and trying to meet the needs of my child in those interactions. And then this is, I think, a post-test. Yes. So in the post-test, there's some questions about satisfaction with the program. There's also these questions that are about, taken from about child and trauma and violence informed practice. So it's about, are people's cultural backgrounds respected? Was I treated with dignity? Did the people respect the strengths I've gained or the strengths of the relationship with my children? Their thoughts about whether or not the program has improved things for them, both in terms of their relationship with their children and the relationship with their kid's mom, and whether or not you'd refer a guy to another father. And then this is, do you want to share the anonymized program evaluation data or not? So that is, if people are interested in engaging in that with their agency, it's not mandatory. You can share it or not share it. You can take the items and do what you want with them, but we will also be more than happy to support and kind of try to bring data together from multiple different places in the UK to provide a picture of some of the things that are changing as a result of caring dads. Yeah, Dermot.
Yeah, all evaluations are really complicated. Even the simplest question is just endlessly kind of. But did you consider putting a kind of a free text kind of thing where they could just like say whatever they wanted, kind of a thing?
There is a pretext. Well, here in the post, it's at the end, but you can put it at the beginning. That's an easy modification. Yes, yeah. And that's probably a good idea. Like give us your feedback right from the start is probably a better start point.
Okay, so I'm going to share the screen here a little bit just to kind of very, very briefly, and then I'll hand it back. If I can. Oh yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the button. um, and it's the. Oh, sorry, I should have got my act together a little bit better. Okay, for some reason that's not working, but uh, just to follow what Katrina said, there's a thing called foundations. Some of you will know this, and it is essentially it started off what works in children's social care, and it's kind of an evidence gathering machine, because the evidence in children's social care has been fairly weak, and in recent years, a lot of people have been trying to build this up and kind of I suppose partly as a rationale. What are you going to spend money on, and what should you focus on? And we've had some kind of fairly vague conversations, I must say, with foundations, and Katrina has been involved in some of those discussions with senior people. And it's been quite a while since we did a full-scale evaluation that NSPCC did in the UK. I think that was 2016 or 14 or thereabouts. But in any event, in a political way, Foundations is kind of part of a group of activities that is related to Frontline also. And I have no doubt that there are hedge funds and various other people supporting this. But Josh McAllister was, for a period of time, the head of this. Now, you may or may not know that Josh McAllister was elected as a Labour MP for Cumbria, a constituency in the Lake District, at the last election. So the chances are that, regardless of the rather miserable kind of announcements from the current government about there being no money for anything, it may be that, for the first time in quite a long time, there may be some space for caring dads to have a kind of a bigger profile nationally, and to get involved in some research and evidence. So I did have a little bit of a conversation about this with them. When you're evaluating a program, there's all sorts of problems, and one of them is if it's immature and new, that's a very different thing from evaluating a program that's kind of well established and people know how to do it. And of course, there are problems in either way. But one of the things camera keeps on turning off, I don't know why. One of the things that happens a lot, and for a lot of the evaluations that they are doing now, is they can't get enough men to evaluate. They can't get enough men on programs, and they can't get enough of a sample size. So just following on a little bit from what Katrina said, since we have now a kind of a more mature evaluation methodology, what would be great is, completely blue sky here. This may or may not actually happen. But if we had a number of sites who will be interested or willing to get involved, not just in the implementation sort of stuff, because, there's plenty of surveys on that, but to maybe get a bit of a coalition of sites who would be willing to do some evaluation, that we could get a big enough sample that we could actually say something realistic about. So that's what foundations and evidence gathering organizations like that want. And it may never happen, but I'm kind of hoping that, so I'm just flagging it up. If in the future we have a call out to you, that I would just encourage people, if it's possible for us to get some more in-depth evaluation across the country, capture all the fantastic work that we're doing. Don't be surprised if I send you an email kind of going, can you please do this? That was it. So I'll just hand back to Katrina. Did that make any sense? I was being very vague. Let me summarize. There are organizations that fund evaluations. We have some conversation with them. It might go nowhere. We have a kind of much more fully developed methodology for doing this that Katrina's just outlined. If it comes to it in the future, please get involved if you're asked to. That's what I was trying to say. Katrina, thank you very much. Perhaps we could move on to Elaine. I'm conscious that people, you don't have forever in a day. But before we do that, does anybody want to ask anything about what Katrina has just kind of outlined and described? There was quite a lot in there, but does anybody have any questions?
Well, and if anybody wants to take another look, send me an email. I will put my email in here and I will send you the little manual and the questionnaires and and you can do, we also have a larger one, which is kind of less well formatted, but I'm happy to send to anybody around here. We've kind of accumulated or tried to accumulate all the different measures that have been used and what they look like in different places around the world.
Katrina, why don't you send that to me and I'll distribute to the whole group?
Sure, I can do that.
Rather than have you 47 emails. I
That's
see
probably a
Elaine
better
and
idea.
Linda have their hands up. So Elaine.
I was just thinking about what you said, Katrina, about developing a program for substance abusing dads. Because I find them, when I look across my groups, I find those the most difficult ones to keep hold of because, it strips them of their best will. But there's a program that we've been asked to provide fathers to support their research that is an American program, and they're developing it from that point of view, from I think starting with the substance abuse. Have you heard of that?
Carla's
I
program?
can't remember the name of it. Dermot will remember it.
So
Is
what
it
did you
Fathers
say?
for Change?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. You've heard of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you say
Yeah,
that name again? Sorry.
Sorry?
Can you say the name of it again?
It's called Fathers for Change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's got a lot of similar stuff to Caring Dads, and these. I mean, it starts off with a long telephone interview with a dad, and all of our dads that they floated this material in front of said, no, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be able to handle a phone.
I've also asked to be involved in that, and I had to kind of back off because there's too much of a conflict of interest for me, but they keep on pursuing me. But in any event, my kind of thought about that is, and having kind of been involved in a lot of different programs over the years, there's a transatlantic translation that you would want to pay attention for, because culturally, the United States of America, even though it's not a homogenous whole, is very, very different in their approach to services than their cousins north of the border. So for me, I have been involved in quite a few programs that seem to emanate from Toronto, including Child Witness Program and things of that nature. Beautiful program, incidentally, but they are much more attuned to the kind of way we do things, even though we know we want to do things differently. Whereas in America, I often feel that. And that's, oh God, I won't go. Anyway, that there's a kind of authoritarian expectation of compliance that I just don't start from. I was asked to kind of adapt or ask for my views about an American probation program, and I have to tell them, if you are delivering this, what my facilitators not having it, because they will get assaulted. They would culturally, they just would not put up with it. So I kind of think people underestimate. They just assume mainly white people English speaking, mainly white people English speaking, and you kind of think, oh my God, do you know what I mean? So I do wonder sometimes about there's something about the ethos and the style of programming that comes from the United States that a lot of the time doesn't fit. Just my personal view. Other views are available.
So and I know Linda, you have your hand up. I will just say there is quite a bit in Carla's work, that has some of the same kind of flavor, because it comes out of the same research, right? Around what do we need to do to support children. The two of the big differences is that the Fathers for Change is an individual program, not a group program. And although individual work has some advantages, the only trial that I've seen that compares the impact of individual versus group for this kind of issue is that group outperforms individual. And it makes sense because, there's so much isolation. in this population, also there's so much power in the group to change some of the norms and the ideas. And you know what, trying to have these same conversations, and maybe some of you have done this, but trying to have the same kind of conversations that you do in Caring Dads individually with a father feels quite different because you don't have all of those things that you can build on. So that's one difference. And the other is, at least on paper, Caring Dads is more willing and committed to walking into more situations where there's higher levels of risk and denial, where the start point of Fathers for Change tends, at least on paper, and in some practices and not others, is you need to voluntarily decide you're going to do this. You need to kind of have some sort of understanding of what you've done wrong. And again, that practice may be different, and it's true in Caring Dads as well. There are Caring Dads programs that run, and the intake looks something like I don't like. It's kind of like, no, admit, you have to take some level of responsibility before getting into the program. And I feel like that's, although you need to think about how many really, really challenging guys that you have in the room, I always kind of default to whether or not the kid and the father has contact, and therefore at least I have to have a conversation and try to think about what's happening here. So those to me are two of the main differences. I think one of the things I like about Fathers for Change, like honestly, the most involvement in Fathers of Change happens in the very beginning, like it's got a kind of 3 phases, fathers only, and then it could be fathers and mothers and fathers and kids. And almost all the research and almost all the programming actually just starts and ends with the fathers because for the same reason. But I think that the idea and thought about, and I've always thought it would be great to be able to continue, like once you've done Caring Dads, how do you pass on to the right next service? And for some guys, that might be father-child dyadic work, but not always, right? Like that's a small portion. For some guys, it might be something different. So it's interesting to think about those kinds of options as well. And going back to groups are hard for organizations, but I think groups are very good for people. Linda?
Oh, mine was just a quick question about evaluation, because we did some evaluation with you, didn't we? Is that similar to what you've just been going through? Yeah.
You did this, yeah.
This one, right. And so, because it involved the interviews after the group's finished with the dads and partners where the dads gave permission and referrers. And those were really interesting to do. We did them for other groups that we weren't running. We didn't have enough staff to get somebody else to do it, but we swapped. And yeah, that was really interesting, particularly meeting some of the partners. Really good. I just wanted to check if that was the same thing. Thanks.
Well, this is this is the self-report you would have done, or the father report that you would have done as part of that. But that's exactly right. I think that when you can do that interview bit, it is so valuable. Yeah. And you just get both a better understanding of the things that are going right and the ways in which fathers are holding on to information. And again, that's where I think the analogies and the kind of repetition is so important. Like you use the continuum over, you use the triangle over and over. So if people have used the wall exercise in the beginning, it tends to get referenced over and over and over, right? You just keep whatever analogy that's sticking, you stick with it. And I think it's interesting to see that carry forward. And then you also can see, and it's often about the kid's mom, that sticking point where there's still a little bit more that needs to be done. Yeah.
Okay, guys, I am going to ask Elaine to do her little bit, but I think it's time for a little screen break because we've been all sitting in a chair for an hour and a half. So if it's okay with you, can we take 5 minutes? It's just coming up to past. So we'll take a little bit longer perhaps and meet again at 25 and I'm going to ask Elaine to do a little bit about reports. And so a little bit of practice wisdom. I will send you out our kind of most recent template, etc. But Elaine's going to go a little bit more thoughtfully, I think, about these. So I will see you again at 25 too. Elaine, Katrina, I don't know if you can still be with us, but I know you're a very busy person. So if you are able to join us afterwards, that would be great. And if not, thank you very much. Okay.
Katrina, I would love it if you interrupt me because I've just put these slides together just off the top of my head, and you
No,
might just look at them and say, "Oh, I think, oh, you know."
they're
Elaine,
really good.
that is just
Okay.
that just never happens. I just go, wow. Anyways, I'll be there. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Lovely.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
I was just eating an apple there. I decided better stop chewing before I turn my mic back on. So I'm sharing the screen there, Elaine, and I'm hoping that you can see your slide. Okay, you're on mute, but I heard.
I can see
Okay,
it.
heard.
Yeah. So I'll just tell you, if that's okay, when for the next slide, because you're controlling the slides, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, people may or may not be back. It's impossible to tell with the cameras off, but I mean, we're recording it anyway, as you know. So, if you could please just crack on in your own time.
Okay. So Dermot asked me if there was anything I'd like to talk about today, and he said that a lot of the people who are attending might be quite newly trained. So I've kind of written this for just a few little suggestions about reports, because I do sometimes read reports and think, you know, like that could have been done a little differently. So these are just a few of my thoughts, and about how the things that, you know, I think are important. And anyone interrupt at any time if you're happy, if you want to, or got any questions. So next slide, Dermy, please. So yeah, I think when we're writing these reports, we've often formed quite a strong connection with fathers that we're writing about. We've had them in the group for 17 weeks, and it's about keeping everybody in our mind as we're writing the report that may read this report, where this report may end up going, because these reports can fly around everywhere. Sorry, I got a message came through there. So yeah, I mean, it's just on the slides, and they can sit in the lives of the people we write about for way longer than we may imagine. I remember speaking to people as a probation officer who had just accessed who had just accessed the notes from their parents' file that was there sitting in social services from when they were children. And sometimes there was stuff in there that was just kind of heartbreaking. So just thinking about the way we frame things, what when mum reads it, what when other professionals read it, what when women's support agencies read it, just be really mindful about the way you use language, about the things that you say, about thinking about the impact on everybody who's involved in that scenario, not just thinking about the dad, which I think sometimes can happen. As Dermot says, sometimes the child's voice gets lost, and maybe mum's voice gets lost as well, because we're working with the dad. And yeah, these I think I've said all that really. And yeah, just this sense I have that the quality of these reports that we send out into the world, they represent caring dads. They've got caring dads written on them, and then, you know, this is this wonderful program which has been pioneered by Katrina and Tim and everyone else involved in it, and the reports we write have got their stamp on, they've got their logo, because they're caring dads, and I just think they need to be really professional for that reason as well. I never send a report directly to a dad. I always send it to a professional with the dad copied in, and always send it as a PDF. I know that might sound really basic, but I don't want dad to be able to be tempted to tweak it. So it's always a PDF, and I always send it to like CAFCAS, social worker, referrer, and then copy him in. So he gets it at the same time. So it's transparent for him, but it is also, you know, it's got that kind of protection that it's going to a professional. Next slide. So getting the report right, I think, starts before the sessions begin. It's about setting the grounding for where that report is going to come from. So in the initial meeting with dads, I will always outline confidentiality, as I'm sure you all do, and, you know, the sharing of information, and that we will share if there's a risk. But other than that, it's a confidential space, but there will be a report at the end, so that they know right from the outset that there's going to be this report. Fathers who are, particularly those who are paying for the intervention, if it's something coming through the family courts, then you've got an organisation where fathers are paying, they have to understand right from the get-go that we are not their advocates. You know, I've had solicitors ringing me up saying, you can't say that, you can't say this. And it's like, well, actually I can, because the remit right from the beginning is that this is in the child's best interest, even though he's paying for it. It's about the child, and that's the starting point. So father should understand that what they say in groups will be noted and shared in reports, with the proviso that we will share the draft report with them, but ultimately our name's on the bottom and it must reflect our opinion. So I will say to the dads, I'll show you a draft of the report before we send it. You can have your inputs. You may see something in a way I haven't seen it, or you maybe think that I've got something wrong, and you can explain your thinking around that. But at the end of the day, it is my report. I've had dads who want to write paragraphs who've actually said to me, I'll write that bit on blah, blah, and you can add that. And I thought, no, that's not what I mean by sharing the draft with you. It's so there's no shocks, no surprises. He's not arriving at a case conference where the social worker's read something that he's never seen. So, you know, having that preparation, and quite often, yeah, anyway, that's before the group starts. So right in that initial 3 week, I'm explaining those processes so that there are no surprises. Next slide, please, Dermot. So during the group, I've changed my mind on this. I used to think that taking notes in sessions could be an inhibiting factor, but I think the benefits of having notes taken in the session are so great, where you get the immediate feedback, you get things that you can quote. I always have a note taker during sessions, and I've explained that this will happen. I've prepared an intake. I'll explain again during the course of the group that I want the report to really reflect them. I want it not to be general. I want it to really reflect their thoughts and feelings and their words and their child and their children. So, and I say, I can't remember 17 weeks of 8 guys talking, you know, so I just can't do that. So these notes are going to be taken. They're for me. They're for me because I'm going to be writing the report. And then I remind them again, you're going to see a draft before it goes out. But I really value those notes. If you think that you can remember everything well enough to do your feedback after the session, I do evening groups. I can't do that at the end of a group. And by the following day already, I will have lost some of the freshness, that will have lost some of those quotes. So if you, it's up to you. Obviously, this is what I do. So next slide, please, Dermot. Then after the group, when it's over, allow enough time in your report writing, if you can, to have some one-to-one discussion of that draft, because sometimes things come out, elements of their learning, bits of confusion, something they haven't told you in the group, and you can get a lot of information sometimes that's relevant that comes out in the discussion of the draft, and as well as all the benefits of them having seen it before it goes off to anywhere else. Yeah, they're prepared for the, so I had that one I was just telling you about, the dad who I think is still really dangerous. I prepared him for what I was going to say in the report, and we had the conversation, and he, you know, he was very reasonable about it. That's going back to a family court. I don't want to cause contention on the day. I want him to know what's happening. I want him to have seen it before. Be willing to listen and be flexible, you know, like what you can change, or listen to, maybe you have phrased something that comes off a little bit the wrong way, but make sure that your final version is child-centred and reflects your opinion. Next slide, please, Dermot. The content of the report must be evidence-based and child-centred. So I've seen reports written sometimes that say he's a good father. He was open and honest during the sessions. How do you know? How do you know he was really on? Are you able to evidence that? Have you triangulated it somewhere? Do you know? You will have the referral. Sometimes you know that he's even said more than what he's told the social worker, or more than what was in the case conference notes. So you can evidence that then. He's been, you know, at least he's shared as came from the referral. But you have to be really careful before you use comments like that. Yeah. And I'll use phrases like, he reports that, you know, he will say in a group, so that, you know, because he will say things in the group, and let the whoever is the decision maker, because we're not making these decisions. Courts, social workers, they're making the decisions about contact and custody and child protection plans. So I'll say something that he said, or he was able to articulate the qualities of good father in discussions. That doesn't mean he's doing them, but he was able to articulate them. So, you know, presenting, you if there's a judge reading this, then I can say what he's said, I can say what he's brought, I can give the examples that he's given of activities he's done with his child, and I can lodge them under the headings of the template. But just be mindful of making these sweeping statements like, and that might sound overly obvious, but I have seen things like this in reports. You know, he is a good dad, he's a very caring and affectionate father. You know, it's like, do you really know that? So just try to triangulate if you can. Now, I had one dad, I was going to all the case conferences. He was the person who was taking the baby to all of the clinic appointments for her vaccinations. The social worker said the house was full of interactive toys. He worked from home. When I saw him sitting with the child in the case conference, he's got the child on his lap. He knows when she's tired. He knows how long she's going to sleep for. He takes her and lays her down. She wakes up in exactly the length of time he said she would. I can see this child, this dad knows this child. I know I've got triangulated evidence that he is doing all these things. And even then, I didn't describe him as a good father. I described him as actively involved and having an understanding of his child's needs. So, because I can evidence those things. So, yeah. And obviously, sometimes we have different amounts of contact with mother and mother's information and her perspective, depending on what your setup is like. I generally don't tell fathers if I've had communication with mum. And I tell mums at the beginning of any conversations I have with her that this is confidential, that I'm not going to be sharing this. It does make a difference having that knowledge of her perspective to how you can work with dads, and you must do that in a kind of non-obvious way, so that it's not clear to him that there's something that's been fed to you that could only have come from her. So that is a little bit of a minefield if you're facilitating and working with mum or hearing mum's feedback through a women's safety worker. But sometimes you hear mum's voice, because if you go to case conferences, she might be there and she might very specifically say things, and then it's okay because it's in the public domain. But thinking all the time about, yeah, mum's views when she gets to see that report, and all the stuff about trust, rebuilding trust, his understanding, his accountability, his understanding of the fact that trust can't be expected, no matter what he does, that he can't expect trust to happen, and just having all of that in your mind really when you're putting these reports together. So that's it really. I think that's is there one more slide? Yeah.
Sorry, just before you go there, because I think, you know, you're so lovely. I think the other thing that I would say, there are some places, and it depends on how your mother contact works. So sometimes mother contact, you know, is done specifically the minimum what you need to do with caring dads, and then you may not have a lot. And I totally agree with you. Like, making sure that you think about mother's voice in those reports. I think when you have if your mother contact is kind of associated with some more robust kind of supports for mom, part of the systems work that can be done is to encourage comments about her views on caring dads and his participation in a report that's hers, and that might be independent, and it is about what her views and thoughts are. Is also a way to think about things, is all I was going to add.
Okay, so a completely separate report with her views in it.
Yes. Okay, now, Elaine, I think that, I don't know, like that, I don't see that working is if the only thing that you're really doing is this is her views on caring dads. I suppose you could do that. That doesn't seem to be probably the best practice, but sometimes I know there are some caring dads where the mother contact is done, but it's also part of a service for mom, and there's also other things happening for mom. And in that case, you know, it's useful for them to be documenting in their files her view of caring dads, and that's why I'm saying it's a systems piece rather than a so it's not so because again, there's like this focus, you know, what's mom doing, as opposed to here's her view on whether or not he is taking some responsibility, or here's what's changed or not changed for fathers, and making sure that that gets documented in terms of her voice.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of my referrals come through the local authority. So mum is present in the case, and she will always be asked in the case conferences, have you noticed any changes in dad since he started the programme? And that goes into the, because I know I've got the social worker overseeing the whole family, then her voice goes through in that way. And if I had stuff from the public domain, you know, something that mum had said in a public domain, then I might mention it in a report because it's already out there. It's just that thing about if it's not out there and her comments, and I don't want to breach her confidentiality. So, but that's an interesting idea, having it would need to be a separate worker that would do a separate report like that, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just about thinking about how and what is being communicated about mom's voice and strategies, right? And what she has done to be protective, which I think is important. So it's a little bit aside from what you're saying, because I can't agree more that it's good to have not only her, if you have that information, that voice in mind, because it also helps you qualify things, right? And I think it helps me think, I'm not going to write he's a good father. I actually don't know. I'm not going to write, you know, he's reduced the hostility to kids' mom. Well, I can write about what he's talked about in group. I can write about what he seems to have some insight into, what he said about understanding the impact on children. But I don't want to be in a situation, I don't want a survivor reading this report going, well, wait a second, that's not actually what was happening at all. And that's why I think that's the other reason having that voice and remembering is so important. I can absolutely talk about what happened in group.
And she may think when she, just to answer quickly, yes, we can send an anonymised copy of a report. Someone asked that question. I think she may well think when she reads the report that's not what happened at all, but it will be to a sentence I've written that says something like, he reports that. And then she can think to herself, well, he's obviously not telling the truth in that group, you know, exactly. But it won't be that I think he's a good dad. Yeah.
I mean, the reality mainly in children's services is there'll be a ton of feedback on her. There'll be all sorts of report, parenting assessments and all sorts of things. Ours will be the minority amount of paperwork usually that's going on.
Yeah.
But Elaine, the last slide has been up for a little while, and I think other people will have read that by now, and you kind of make good points. But could you clarify the first point on that last slide? I'm quite conscious of the time now, so we're coming to the end, and I'd like to leave a minute or two for questions.
Okay, so that dad I was talking about earlier with the extremely abusive father, he didn't want to talk about anything that he'd done. He was in total denial up till about week 14. And then I just said to him, you know, you're going back to court. You have been, I mean, he engaged with all the exercises, but he didn't actually bring anything of his own. And then I said, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think it will not be just seen as that you haven't engaged with the process if you don't speak about anything you've done here? And you've heard the other dads and blah, blah, blah. And it was he then did. And it was amazing when he did. There was so much that he then gave in one of the problem solving exercises, and he'd alluded to stuff from his own past, but he actually spoke about stuff he'd done to his child's mum, which he kept wriggling out of it before with, well, it happened before the child was born. So I don't see how it's relevant to my fathering because it happened before the child was born. Okay. So we just had a bit of a one-to-one about the report, and boom, some motivation, just gave him that little nudge. So that's what I mean by that slide.
Thank you very much for that, Elaine.
It's fine to recommend further work, but not to make recommendations about frequency of child contact or local
that's been up there for a while now, so I think they'll have read that by now. So, and that is, of course, our bottom lines. But I would like to, we have 5 minutes left in the meeting, so I would just like to open the floor. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. And I'm just going to ask, has anybody got any questions about anything, in fact, to do with the Caring Dads
program? Can I just say super, super helpful, Elaine? That was super, super helpful. I think that was a really good, that was a lovely slide deck. And yeah.
Thank you.
Claire.
Hi, from my point of view, just an observation, that was really, really useful from Elaine, because one of the questions I'm getting asked, we're all newbies, we're not doing our training until next month. There's already been lots of questions around the report writing, so that really, really did answer a lot of questions for me, Elaine, so I really, really do appreciate that. This has been so useful for me, and it's going to be such a tool. I will be emailing you all just all the time, so get used to it. Okay.
You're welcome, Claire, and we look forward to hearing about how it all goes. But you already have an established tradition in Sefton, so you're just building on good, solid foundations. Anybody else have a question or observation? Claire was observing.
I'd just like to say that I've really enjoyed it, and it's been really informative of everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so I have a little list of tasks. So this recording, I will download. If I just left it as it is, you wouldn't be able to access it because of firewall. So what I do with things like this is I have a little YouTube channel. It's got all sorts of garbage in it. None of it's going to be of any interest to you, but I will be able to upload it there and make it private so yourselves and other people can access. I'll make a little PDF out of Elaine's slides and send them out to you. And there was something else I had to do in relation to that. Oh, Elaine has said that there's possibility of an anonymized final report. Elaine, if did you say that you could do that? Sorry, you're on mute.
Yes, I should be able to anonymise a couple of reports.
Thank you.
I'll send them to you, Dermot, and you can upload them.
I'm quite happy to kind of send them out. And I know that you will take care in those things. But also, I know you write quality reports. So we may as well have something that looks like what they should like.
You might read them and go, what was she talking about?
No,
No.
I know I won't be doing that. We can also, we'll use the network to kind of distribute some information about evaluations that Katrina mentioned earlier on, and I'll just act as a kind of a funnel for that, and I'll send them out to all and sundry. And I think they were the three things from today that I'm supposed to do now. But if there's anything else, have I left anything out? I'm not sure I have. Anyway, you can always remind me, email me. You know, this is kind of supposed to be a bit of a open forum for discussion and sharing information. So please feel free to contact us and talk to each other. Linda.
Dermot, do we need to get some volunteer for the next one?
Good.
Does that happen in this meeting? Will, what's your thoughts on that?
What normally happens after these network meetings is hopefully a volunteer will come forward to arrange the next network meeting.
Right.
So what I would suggest on that, rather than put people on the spot right now, is when I start sending stuff out, I'll send it to the whole network and I'll include that as a question, because somebody might want to host who wasn't able to be here today for whatever reason.
True.
So thank you. That's 4 things on my list. If I know how many things are on the list, I do it. I don't have to remember them all, but I do have to have a number. Neurodiverse? I don't know. Guys, I think that's it. It's nearly on the hour. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions. Thanks particularly, of course, to Elaine and Katrina. Lovely to see you both again. And I look forward to seeing some of you in the not too distant. And enjoy the rest of the day and the week.
Lovely to see you, Katrina and Linda.
Lovely to see everybody. Thank you so much.
And everyone else. And Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
See you.
Yeah, Kelly's there.
Hello.
Hey, Kelly.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Goodbye.
bye.
Dan, have you got your hand up there? No, just an old hand. Hello, Ed.
Dermot, thank you. That was lovely.
Yeah, well, it was nice just to sit around and just talk about these things every so often. We have to create a bit of space for that, don't we?
Yeah, it was really lovely.
Yeah, it was nice. So do you know whatchamacallit? I'm just still have tetchy relationship with them people in changing ways. Can't help myself.
Yeah, no, we do. Yeah, exactly. So it is absolutely moving to the university in January. There's going to be no problems with
Okay.
it moving now, which is really good because there was also no problems before legally, but you know how legal in real life.
You
But
just
there,
don't want
it's
to make
not going to
life
be a
any more
problem.
difficult for yourself, get involved in legal kind of stuff. Jarndyce is the Dickens reference. The court case that goes on and on and on forever and ever about an inheritance until such a point as all the inheritance is gone. Do you know
Exactly.
what I mean? So, but I look forward to it, and hopefully we'll talk again before then. Give us a heads up when you're kind of thinking about what it's going to look like. Send us the links to the evaluation stuff. I don't know if that foundation thing will ever come to anything, but I'm going to kind of put a little poke in there every so often to see if we can get them moving.
Absolutely.
All right
And
then.
honestly, it would be great to have some people, like if people would be willing to sign on and do some research. Now we can make, at the moment, it is in Google Forms, but if people want it in paper, we can do it in paper. It's just that that was an efficient way to do it.
Well, I kind of found these days in the groups, how do you show a video? I get them all to look on their phones these days.
I
So it's
know. And
kind
so
of
if you have a
like,
QR code, you just get them to scan the QR code and
exactly.
then it's done.
And so I think that's really the way to go. I mean, may as well come into the 21st century, isn't it? But in any event, send me the links and then we'll continue to talk, and I'll see you later.
Bye. Have a good
Say
night.
hello to Sarah for me, by the way.
I will. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.